Why would an entire people, cornered to the edge of annihilation, dare to walk straight into the heart of the sea to find life? Behind them thundered the hooves and wheels of Egypt's most terrifying war chariots. With Pharaoh's claws nearly at their throats, why would Moses tell them, "Do not be afraid. Stay to the very end, and you'll witness the moment the Red Sea devours a kingdom, and how God makes a way where there is no way," in a single breath. Israel did not leave Egypt like a conquering army. They left like a people still shaking off their chains, men and women, children and elders, livestock pressing forward, desert dust clinging to their clothes. They didn't take the shortest route because that road ran near Philistine territory, too close to war, too close to fear, too close to the temptation to turn back. So they took the longer way. They moved toward the Red Sea, deeper into a harsh wilderness where each day carried one relentless question in the back of every mind. Am I really free? In the middle of that moving mass, Moses walked like a man carrying the sky on his shoulders. He wasn't just leading them out of Egypt, he was leading them through their own terror. Resting on him was the promise of God, yet in front of him were thousands of exhausted eyes, confused eyes, doubtful eyes. And Moses carried something else, something like a stamp of history in their hands, the bones of Joseph. Long ago, Joseph had made his descendants swear that when God finally rescued them, they would take his remains back to Canaan. Now that the ancient oath traveled with them through the sand, reminding everyone that this journey wasn't merely an escape, it was a return. It was a promise fulfilled. As they moved toward the land God had sworn to give them, they walked through visible miracles and through hardship that was relentless. By day, a pillar of cloud towered above them like shade in the brutal heat, an impossible canopy in a land that offered none. By night, a pillar of fire blazed like a lighthouse in a black sea, warming them and guiding them as the wind hissed through the tents and the sand stung their skin. But on the other side, in Egypt's palace, Pharaoh changed his mind. Maybe it was a moment of clarity. Maybe it was pride roaring back to life. He looked at the emptiness left behind, the slaves gone, the labor gone, and in that silence he felt his power slipping away. What have we done? The thought sliced through his ego like a knife. Orders flew, chariots were prepared, wooden wheels were tightened, reins were pulled taut, bronze helmets gleamed under the sun. Pharaoh gathered his men, his best chariots, his elite force, and stormed into the desert like a living sandstorm. The news hit Israel's camp like a lightning strike. They were resting by the edge of the Red Sea, an endless stretch of dark water in front of them, cold and unmovable, like an invisible wall sealing every exit. Then the ground began to tremble. Far off on the horizon, flashes of metal grew brighter, armor, helmets, spearheads. The pounding of hooves and the grinding of wheels rolled toward them like the drumbeat of doom. They didn't need an explanation. Death was coming. They were trapped between an ocean and the most feared army on earth. Fear ignited faster than fire. Cries rose, accusations exploded, panic swallowed the camp whole. Bitter eyes turned toward Moses. "Did you bring us out here to die?" In that moment, the instincts of slavery surged back. Those instincts trained to bow, trained to surrender, trained to believe that death is the only door left open. Freedom had barely touched their hands, and now it looked like a cruel trap. Moses stood between the roar of waves in front of him and the violent rattle of Egypt behind him. He was human. He could feel the tremor of dread. But instead of collapsing, he planted his feet. He turned to the people not with a sword, not with a strategy, but with the only thing he had left, the promise of God. And into the rising chaos came a command that sounded almost insane. Tell the Israelites to move forward. Forward. Into what? Moses didn't argue. He lifted his staff over the water, an act of absolute obedience before a power far greater than any empire. Then it began. A fierce east wind screamed through the night, howling like something alive, whipping the tents, tearing at clothing, throwing sand into the air until the world looked blurred with dust. The sea began to shift. Waves were driven back. Water pulled away as if forced by an unseen hand. And then, before millions of wide, breathless eyes, a road appeared. Dry ground in the middle of the sea. On both sides, walls of water stood towering, dark, trembling like enormous living things holding their breath. The air was thick with salt, seaweed, and a cold that cut into the skin. The wind roared through that watery corridor like a war drum pushing them onward. For one stunned heartbeat, Israel stood frozen. Then they stepped. They walked into the sea between two vertical walls of water, moving toward freedom inside a miracle no human mind could explain. The first step was the hardest. It was the step out of fear's logic. But then came the next, and the next. And soon the sound of countless feet filled that passage. They moved fast, not because they suddenly became brave, but because they knew time was bleeding away. That road was a boundary line between slavery and freedom, between hopelessness and promise. Behind them, Pharaoh saw the opening, and rage made him blind. He drove his army forward. Egypt's chariots thundered down into the path God had carved. But then the wheels began to sink. The ground turned heavy. Mud clutched at the axles. Horses screamed. Soldiers shouted. The invincible force began to crumble, not with a heroic battle, but with quiet, humiliating unraveling inside the corridor of the sea. And when Israel finally reached the far shore, when the last trembling family stepped onto land, God spoke to Moses again. "Stretch out your hand over the sea." Moses obeyed, and the water came down. Those towering walls collapsed like mountains breaking apart. The sea crashed with a sound like the sky splitting. Waves swallowed chariots, horses, and soldiers. Pharaoh's power was erased in an instant. The path vanished without a trace. The Red Sea returned to what it had been, as if nothing had happened at all. Only the waves remained, and a chilling silence after the storm. On the far shore, Israel stood staring at the water as it calmed. The fear that had hunted them for generations, fear that lived in their bones, suddenly loosened its grip. They had not won by weapons. They had not escaped by cleverness. They had been rescued. Their breath broke out in sobs of relief, disbelief, and release as people dragged back from the edge of death. Then joy burst open in the wilderness. Miriam, Moses' sister, lifted a tambourine. The women followed her, singing, dancing, voices rising into the air, still salted by the sea. The drums echoed across the sand. Their song wasn't about human strength, it was praise. Praise to God, the one who had thrown both horse and rider into the deep and shattered the pride of an empire with a single command. But the story doesn't end at the shoreline. The Red Sea wasn't just a spectacle meant to amaze. It was a marker, a dividing line, proof that Israel's journey was part of something larger, God's plan for his people. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire weren't simply navigation. They were the sign of God's presence, guiding, guarding, staying with them step by step. And they learned something that would have to carry them through everything ahead. Freedom isn't the absence of enemies. Freedom is belonging to the one who leads you, even when the only thing in front of you is a sea. But after the song, the desert remained. And new tests were waiting: thirst, hunger, complaints, and the struggle to keep believing when miracles aren't towering in front of your eyes every day. Next episode, they'll go deeper into the wilderness where faith won't be measured by a sea splitting open, but by whether they can trust God when all they see is scorching sand and endless night. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next Bible story.